I bet you've heard of Pablo Escobar's luxurious estates, filled with pools, helicopters, and private zoos. After all, there's still 100 hippos living in South America because of him. More recently, El Chapo had a diamond-encrusted pistol that he took everywhere with him, and this prized possession even had his initials written on it. But it's not just them, folks. There are many more like them. When a big fish goes down, an even bigger one appears from the shadows. Such is the case of El Mencho, the most wanted man in Mexico. He started out as an avocado farmer and became the most ruthless and one of the most richest in the country. In this video, we're going to tell you all about his insane lifestyle, his rise to power, and the rumors of his downfall. Before we can discuss the glitz and glam of El Mencho's lifestyle, it's important to understand how he started out. Most Mexican drug lords of his generation are in prison or dead, but not Namisco Ruben Oseguera Cervantes. At 56 years old, the kingpin has never been caught. And today, there is a $10 million reward for his capture or any information leading to his arrest, offered by the U.S. government. Why the U.S. government?
Tonight, the DEA is offering $10 million for information leading to the arrest of the Mexican drug kingpin known as El Mencho. He's blamed for a flood of narcotics into the U.S.
Not just a flood. More than a third of all drugs coming from Mexico into the U.S. is El Mencho's making. His cartel, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, aka CJNG, is now known as the second most powerful cartel after the mighty Sinaloa and the bloodiest cartel in Mexico.
Cartel de Jalisco Nueva Generación, CJNG, is the single criminal organization most responsible for these deaths on both sides of the border.
El Mencho's operations have expanded far and wide across Mexico and several states in America. Needless to say, El Mencho has a whole drug empire, and it looks like it's here to stay. This is made even crazier by the fact that El Mencho was once an avocado farmer. You heard right. El Mencho was born on July 17, 1966, in Michoacan, to a family of poor avocado farmers. By the way, Michoacan is the most avocado-rich region in Mexico. Perhaps it's no shock that he was poor. All ruthless kingpins were born in tough economical situations. This is what made them so desperate to escape their condition and gain the power that their families never had. But there's another ingredient here. Namisio was exposed to violence and the ins and outs of cartel life from a very young age. When he was in the 5th grade, he left school and got a job looking after avocado fields. He left elementary school after his 5th year, but these fields weren't owned by his family or any ordinary people. They were the property of the Millennial Cartel.
The Millennial Cartel used to be one of the most financially powerful cartels in Mexico.
Sadly, powerful cartels infiltrate every business they can get their hands on, extorting people and threatening their families into submission. For the Millennial Cartel, the avocado trade was profitable in itself, but it was also a front for trafficking weed, which they were hiding in the fruit carts going into the U.S. Of course, El Mencho was an active participant, even as a young teen. And along with the rules of trafficking and infiltrating businesses came the violence that the cartels normally used to get their way.
The economical power behind the Cartel Jalisco, they literally started with avocados, so they were farmers. They literally started moving from avocados to chemical precursors to make drugs like methamphetamine. It's like, okay, so what the U.S. market like? They like their avocados from Mexico and their meth from Mexico.
Within a few years, Namisio became a plantation watchman. Then he got even promoted to trafficker, but he had bigger dreams than avocados or working for another cartel. So he left the fields behind and illegally moved to Northern California. Once in the States, El Mencho became involved with heroin and methamphetamine gangs. That's when he started to build his own network. He would take frequent trips between Mexico and the United States, often under different aliases like Roberto Salago or Miguel Valadez. When he was 19 years old, he was arrested by the San Francisco police for stealing and carrying a loaded gun. This would be the first of his many run-ins with the police. In 1989, he was arrested again in San Francisco for selling drugs, and he was deported back to Michoacan. But he re-entered the States, of course, illegally. 3 years later, he was arrested once again, this time on federal drug charges in California. El Mencho and his older brother Abraham were caught carrying out a heroin deal. Abraham was in charge of the transaction, while Namisio was on the lookout. Although he was much younger than his brother, Mencho recognized that the men were being set up and even warned his brother, something the police caught on the wiretap. 3 weeks after the incident, the two were arrested. And Mencho claimed that he wasn't involved in the deal, but ultimately, he had to plead guilty to save his brother from a lifetime prison sentence. He was sentenced to 5 years and imprisoned at the Big Spring Correctional Center for 3 years before being released and deported back to Mexico. And Mencho was now 30 years old, and he had a big wake-up call. But the lesson that he learned was not that he shouldn't deal with drugs, it was that he should do it from his home country. Once back in Mexico, Nemesio went back to his old habits with the Milenio cartel. He enrolled as a full-time member and started out as a part of the assassin squad protecting drug lord El Maradona. But in 2003, El Maradona was arrested, and this was the beginning of the end for the Milenio cartel. Around the same time, a rival gang called Los Zetas took charge of Michoacan. For El Mencho, this was eye-opening for a number of reasons. First, it meant that whoever was more violent was in charge. Second, well, Los Zetas had a unique approach to cartel life. Los Zetas started out as a Gulf cartel's army. It was the first cartel army made from special-trained soldiers, Mexican deserters that had trained in the U.S.
So what you saw was a change in the way drug cartels fought with violence. It was no longer those gang members with shaved heads and tattoos, fighting with pistols and knives. It was militarized style, fighting like military units. And once they did it, this was spread across to every cartel in Mexico.
Until Los Zetas, cartel violence was more of a means to an end than a goal in itself. But Los Zetas glorified violence and even rewarded its most brutal soldiers with medals of honor. They made violence and spreading fear the goal. In 2010, Los Zetas broke away from the Gulf cartel and became their own cartel. During their years, homicides in Mexico rose dramatically, and the crime scenes were worse than ever.
They burned these individuals in a 55-gallon drum using diesel because diesel burns slower.
But Los Zetas focused so much on violence that they forgot about making money. The Sinaloa cartel was much better organized and more powerful when it came to trafficking routes. And you know how violence only leads to more violence? I think you know where I'm headed with this. In the early 2000s, as the Milenio cartel was losing power, and Mencho relocated to Guadalajara. There he formed an agreement with the already notorious Sinaloa Cart, led by El Chapo. Under his alliance, Nemesio and his group took care of the Sinaloa cartel's operations in the state of Colima and Jalisco for the next few years. In 2009, Milenio cartel's new leader, Oscar Nava Valencia, also called El Lobo, was arrested. Less than a year later, his brother El Tigre was caught as well. This was a huge blow to the cartel, and El Mencio had a strong feeling this would be the end of the Milenio cartel, so he stepped in to take charge of it. But he wasn't the only one wanting a piece of the pie. An internal war started, and the once great Milenio cartel was split into two halves. One side was called the Resistance, while the other was known as Los Marazetas, the Zeta Killers, headed by Mencho. The two groups fought for territory in Jalisco. To make their claim stronger, the Zeta Killers started a propaganda campaign against their rivals, denouncing extortions led by the Resistance against civilians, businessmen, and government authorities. It eventually won their war in 2009.
The Milenio cartel splintered over, and one of those splinters was Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación, the CJNG.
Quick note, initially El Mencho's cartel was called Los Torcidos, or the Twisted Ones. Perhaps this name was more fitted, considering El Mencho's methods. As the leader of the CJNG, El Mencho grew his organization at an exponential rate. The group went from being a small territorial expansion to one of the leading criminal organizations in the country, and El Mencho himself became a most wanted man. Other cartels grow due to crafty business tactics and bribing authorities. El Mencho, well, his approach is pure violence and terror.
Relaja tus putas partidas, si no te voy a partir tu madre, tienes toda tu bola de perros. Te tengo identificado 30 güeyes. Hasta tus putos perros te voy a matar si no te relajas, güey. ¿Cómo ves?
Ya está, señor, ahorita los va.
This is the Mexican police El Mencho is speaking to. This is how he addresses authorities. For him, it's simple. If they don't do his bidding, he'll just kill them. And then he'll kill the next squad, and then he'll kill their families. And Mencho was inspired by Los Zetas' militarized army, and he took this to a whole new level. Every CJNG member is dressed in military suits and is carrying very serious firearms.
And in July, footage would emerge of that CJNG convoy. These gunmen call themselves the Elite Group and pledge allegiance to El Mencho. They're armed with assault rifles with grenade launchers attached to the barrel, heavy machine guns, and also this gun. This is a .50 caliber sniper rifle. It's a powerful weapon that the CJNG loves to show off.
Just look at what the Mexican authorities found at one of the CJNG bases. The army is structured, organized, and trained in warfare. This means that they are always ready to attack or defend their headquarters. But they rarely defend it. CJ&G's philosophy is to attack everyone before they even do anything, a sort of kill or be killed. But unlike other Mexican cartels, CJ&G doesn't just attack rival cartels for power, money, and territory. They attack anyone, from police officers to civilians. And as they get more money, they invest more in militarized equipment. In April 2015, the CJ&G ambushed dozens of police officers and trapped them in a corner. Everyone was shot at continuously, and 15 officers died. Another 14 officers were killed in Anguilla, and it was all caught on camera.
Ocho, una aguililla, ocho heridos, X13, ocho.
In the late 2010s, the government declared CJ&G Mexico's #1 enemy.
The latest cartel target, Mexico's military. The Jalisco New Generation cartel took the fight to the next level, shooting down a military helicopter with a rocket-propelled grenade.
Maybe stating the obvious, but no one had the guts to go after the military before. The helicopter El Mencho had brought down was thought to be tracking him, and he couldn't have that. El Mencho had a whole personal army surrounding him at all times, and people infiltrated in the police telling him he is being tracked. According to the DEA, El Mencho is even more sneaky.
And all that violence is only to have leverage in the negotiations with the government, with politicians, right? They create these chaos to go and sit with the local politicians and say like, okay, do you want more or shall we negotiate this?
It really seems like there's no end to El Mencho's lust for power. If the authorities give him what he wants, he'll only militarize some more and make the CJ&G more powerful. If they decline, he'll continue to kill officers and civilians until they do. Today, even the Mexican military lives in constant fear of CJ&G attacks.
¿Un dron o qué? Ese mero. ¿Dónde está el dron?
Está volando derecho arriba.
Hay un dron.
At the end of 2022, The Guardian reported 26,000 murders in Mexico. The last few years have been record-setting in terms of homicides. In 2021, there were 94 homicides per day. Violence is at an all-time high, and El Mencho is responsible for a huge part of it. According to sources, El Mencho is solely responsible for the drug trafficking operations in the states of Jalisco, Colima, and Guanajuato, where he created an entire base for methamphetamine production and trade. And it didn't just stop there. Internationally, the CJ&G has rumored ties with criminal groups in the United States, Latin America, Europe, Asia, and Africa. As of right now, the group is one of Mexico's most profitable criminal gangs of all time. And their methods are despicable, to say the least.
Vives acostado al lado de un cuerpo, ves cómo matan a la gente, pruebas la carne humana. Vives el terror.
This is the terrible context of El Mencho's wealth. According to government estimates, El Mencho's organization is worth about $50 billion in total assets. Not only is that a whopping amount of money, but the drug kingpin only seems to be getting better and better with time. One reason for El Mencho's success is his ability to use market and consumer changes to his advantage. For example, initially, the CJ&G produced just methamphetamine, but as soon as Mencho saw that consumer demand changed, he moved to heroin production. Today, the CJ&G is known as the core distributor of fentanyl, which has surpassed heroin as America's deadliest banned drug in recent years. Yeah, El Mencho deals with the absolute worst substances on the black market.
We have had, more overdose deaths in 1 year than we did of COVID deaths in our city.
Fentanyl made thousands of people homeless, physically and emotionally destroyed, and completely unable to let go of this self-destructive addiction. Fentanyl was created as a painkiller, an opioid 100 times stronger than morphine. Of course, this came in handy in medical operations, but when it became a street drug, it brought more death per year than any other drug in the US. That's because it's incredibly cheap and incredibly strong.
It doesn't last long, so you're sick again. Like heroin you can do in the morning and you can be all good till tomorrow. Like fentanyl you can withdraw like 3 times a day.
Around 1% of fentanyl users will die. The number is huge. In the context of this video, it just goes to show how many people El Mencho is hurting. It's not just rival cartel members, it's police officers, judges, their families, and all the hundreds of thousands of people that overdose on the narcotics they produce and smuggle. Here's another shocking plot twist. El Mencho was once a cop. Yes, after he was deported to Mexico aged 30, he briefly joined the local police forces of Cabo Corrientes and Tamalin in Jalisco. Of course, around the same time, he was considering his options in the Milenio cartel, and beforehand, he'd only known a life of crime. So it's not like his heart was in the authorities. But from his time there, he learned something other drug kingpins didn't have: extreme discipline. El Mencho doesn't do drugs or even drink alcohol, avoiding mistakes made by other leaders. He exercises regularly and stays fit at all times. He also rarely shows up in public and mostly stays in remote compounds that are near impossible for authorities to breach, surrounded by his personal army. His police-learned discipline also led him to organize his army better than other cartel enemies. They are trained soldiers with impeccable attack strategies, not drunk, chaotic sicarios.
Right, the CJNG on their vests, they dressed as properly military. They also have these high-caliber guns. They have what they call those monstros, which are really basically what man-made tanks, you know? So their firepower is incredible.
The CJNG learned many of their methods from an earlier hyper-violent cartel, Los Zetas, who they originally fought a major...
But all that aside, El Mencho uses extreme violence and condones it with every one of his soldiers. Acid baths, hangings, decapitation, and even cannibalism has been normalized in the CJNG. And what's even worse? Some of these gruesome deaths are even posted on social media. The message is simple. This is what happens if you mess with the CJNG, and some of their victims are just people who spoke out against El Mencho. 3 years ago, Kyle Morey, the head of the DEA team tasked with finding El Mencho, stated that he believed that the drug boss was worth at least $500 million and could also be well worth over $1 billion. Of course, it's hard to get an accurate estimate when all this money is cash, probably hidden all around Mexico. Remember how Pablo Escobar kept his money? There are still dozens of cash barrels buried around Colombia, and no one knows where. 3 decades have passed since Escobar's death, so who knows what crafty methods El Mencho has to hide his illicit money. And you know how he stays this rich? Despite all his wealth, the drug lord likes to stay hidden. Unlike El Chapo and other historic kingpins, El Mencho prefers staying hours away from the bustle of busy cities and likes power over money. Even with a billion-dollar enterprise, he doesn't flash his wealth by showing up at expensive restaurants or driving through the streets of Mexico in Lamborghinis, but that doesn't mean he doesn't have it all. According to a report by Univision, authorities took control of a number of El Mencho establishments over the last few years. El Mencho lost the following to the authorities: more than 100 Japanese restaurants? What? Also, it's not really cool to buy endangered animals and keep them in tiny cages for your delight. But then nothing is cool about El Mencho. He's a real-life monster with an insatiable lust for money and power. And despite all of this, El Mencho stays at large. According to him, this is why El Mencho doesn't flash his money. He's always on the run, and he knows he'd be noticed the first time he would appear in public with luxury cars, clothes, and accessories. This is his only low-key punishment. El Mencho is rich, but he can't use his money for his own lifestyle without getting caught. As you can expect, there have been many tries to capture this criminal mastermind, but every single time, he's gotten away. In August 2012, the Mexican Federal Police in Toña followed up on an anonymous tip stating that there was an organized crime cell present in the area. As soon as the security forces showed up, a shootout broke out between the two parties. 6 CJNG gunmen were killed, but the police also lost men. Reports suggested that El Mencho was captured in the operation, but the Mexican government later confirmed that he was not in custody. Since then, the authorities never got so close to arresting the kingpin. The CJNG is highly committed to making sure that he never gets caught. As their forces grow, so does the army tasked with protecting their boss.
Yo sé quién es el patrón, señor Don Mencho, una persona muy honorable y las personas que lo conocen saben la calidad de persona que es.
Yeah, very honorable. That is also to say, El Mencho's army sometimes sounds brainwashed. When El Mencho's men was asked about CJNG's infamous violence, he replied,
Nosotros no nos dedicamos a eso. Nosotros nos dedicamos, somos narcotraficantes. Nosotros producimos, exportamos y vendemos droga. Eso es de lo que el papá de nosotros hace el dinero. Esa es la empresa de nosotros.
This is the same cartel that posts video of machete decapitations, just saying. But back to El Mencho's attempted arrests. In the past, the group has developed serious coordinated tactics to prevent his arrest, like blocking several highways and roads by setting vehicles on fire. His men burn cars to use them as blockades to prevent forces from getting to their leader. In March 2015, CJNG gunmen ambushed a federal police convoy and killed 5 police officers and 3 civilians. It was reported that this attack was carried out to protect El Mencho, who was in the area for a meeting. Days later, Roberto Acevedo Cardenas, also called El Gringo, one of Mencho's closest associates, was killed in a shootout with the federal police in Zacalaco de Torres, Jalisco. After this incident, El Mencho commanded his group to attack the Mexican federal police. In the following weeks, CJNG gunmen blocked roads in San Sebastian del Oeste with a burning vehicle and fired at Jalisco police convoy, killing 15 policemen and wounding 5 more. On the same day, the police chief of Zacalaco de Torres was killed by CJNG hitmen. Months later, the Mexican government launched Operation Jalisco, a military-led campaign that intended to tackle organized crime in the state and capture leaders. As soon as the operation began, reports showed that the El Mencho was in Toña, and the security forces went after him, all guns blazing. In the small time of Villa Purificación, the CJNG members shot down a Mexican army helicopter with a rocket-propelled grenade launcher, killing 9 soldiers.
We heard a boom, like a bomb. They took down the aircraft.
Several roads along the Guadalajara area were blocked to immobilize law enforcement and help El Mencho get away safely. His men set 39 buses, 11 banks, and 16 gas stations on fire. The fight spread through 20 different towns and 3 neighboring states. As of 2023, the authorities aren't sure where El Mencho is hiding. The DEA is pretty certain he is hiding in the mountains, surrounded by his usual personal army. But the mountains is a vague place, and they also know El Mencho doesn't stay put for too long. After all, constantly moving is the only hope of not getting caught. Nemesio Cervantes' inner circle is made of mercenaries with former military training, and his second security circle is rumored to be much larger in size. Clearly, he surrounds himself with men who would sacrifice their own life for him. It's crazy to think that there are so many men looking up to this monster. But cartels are a violent world of power-thirsty people, and sometimes they recruit young, vulnerable teens who just learn to copy their bosses. Many of these people had no choice but to respect and serve El Mencho. El Mencho is the leading defendant in a federal indictment accusing him of leading a continuing criminal enterprise. He also is charged with conspiring to send large amounts of drugs to the United States and using firearms in drug trafficking. Apart from this, he faces meth trafficking charges from 2013 federal indictment in Mississippi. But here's a final plot twist. Today, there are rumors El Mencho might be ill or even dead. In 2020, it was reported that El Mencho suffered from kidney disease and had built his own private hospital to treat it. In February 2022, unconfirmed reports started popping up with even bigger news that El Mencho died in hospital following a respiratory arrest. While this hasn't been confirmed officially, there is something that might stand as confirmation. Jose Bernabel Brizuela Maraz, alias La Vaca, and his cartel of Colima left several narcomantas messages. Banners all around the city spoke of El Mencho being dead. La Vaca was a huge El Mencho loyalist, but believing he was dead, he deserted the cartel. And when drug lords begin to quit work, it means they no longer trust the big cartels.
So with all the rumors around El Mencho being dead or very ill or out of the cartel, that started, I guess they started like around 2020 when we started reading about El Mencho being out of the cartel Jalisco. I reached out to 2 middle range commanders inside the cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación. One of them believed that he was just literally just out of the cartel. He's well, he's alive, he's just like stepped up or stepped out of the cartel. And the other guy believes that El Mencho is actually pretty ill or might even be dead.
Historically, when a drug kingpin dies, the whole cartel crumbles under them, right? Pablo Escobar, Miguel Angel, Felix Garrido are 2 decent examples. Does this mean the CJNG is about to crumble as well? Or does the organized structure El Mencho left behind has what it takes to choose a new leader? As of 2023, CJNG is already splitting into tinier factions, all waging war on rival cartels and on one another.
Momento, el dron, güey. Tráeme el dron. El dron. Tráeme el dron, güey. Las pilas.
Me dieron un putazo.
If El Mencho is really dead, what will happen to his wealth? Is his family trying hard to keep up the appearances and act like Nemesio is still alive, to keep the wealth and protect the cartel? And how long will the front keep up? As soon as the authorities can confirm his demise, they will move in and try to seize everything he acquired illegally. And in El Mencho's case, that is literally everything he owns. Even if he is dead and the government will seize his wealth, will that make up for the years of pain, fear, and terror he spread? As always, thanks so much for watching. What do you think about El Mencho? Are the rumors of his demise true, or are they spread by people who are trying to climb the cartel ladder? Comment your thoughts below, and before you go, make sure to like and subscribe to this channel. Goodbye and see you soon.